can't get rid of them at concerts, asking these questions about, you know, what made you write this. And
is empty. Not quiet empty. There is a difference. Quiet means people could arrive at any moment. Empty means the moment may never come. Thousands of seats disappear into darkness. A giant stage waits beneath cold rehearsal lights. Microphones stand untouched. Guitars rest inside black cases. And somewhere near the center of it all, a strip of tape marks the position where one of the most recognizable performers in music history is supposed to stand. But Mick Jagger is not there. He is 75 years old, recovering from heart valve replacement surgery in New York City. The Rolling Stones have postponed their tour. Fans are holding tickets for concerts that may never happen. Promoters are calculating losses. Crew members are waiting for news. And behind carefully worded public statements, one uncomfortable question hangs over everything.
Why don't you go to a hotel?
A hotel? You must be joking.
Finally reached the end? Not the end of his life. The end of the impossible version of it. The running. The dancing. The sprinting from one side of a stadium to the other. The physical performance that has made generations of audiences wonder whether the man on stage is somehow operating by different biological rules. Doctors have repaired his heart. But no surgeon can guarantee that they have restored Mick Jagger. Then, only weeks later, a video appears. He is dancing again, not slowly walking through a few careful movements, not standing beside a microphone and pretending everything is normal. He is moving through a rehearsal studio with a restless energy audiences have watched for decades. 6 weeks after surgery, the man many feared might never command a stadium again is preparing to return to one. And that is where the real story begins. Because Mick Jagger's life is not simply the biography of a famous singer. It is a 60-year argument between one man and every person, institution and limitation that believed it knew when he should stop. His parents thought music was an irresponsible gamble.
Very famous rock star. I'm Mick Jagger.
Louco foragido.
The British establishment treated him like a danger to society. The Rolling Stones nearly destroyed themselves from within. Age was expected to slow him down. Then his own heart appeared to issue the final warning. Yet every time the world prepared to write the last chapter, Mick Jagger seemed to turn the page himself. Michael Philip Jagger was born on July 26, 1943. In Dartford, Kent. Nothing about his early life seemed designed to produce rock and roll's most provocative frontmen. His father, Basil, was a physical education teacher. His mother, Eva, was active in the community. The household was stable, disciplined, and respectable. Young Michael was intelligent, academically capable, and expected to build a secure professional future. He was not raised as a reckless outsider. He was raised to succeed within the system. And for a while, that appeared to be exactly what he would do. He earned a place at the London School of Economics, where he studied subjects connected to business and finance. It was the kind of achievement parents could proudly explain to relatives. A respectable institution, a sensible education, a path leading towards a stable career. But Jagger was carrying another life inside him. While Britain listened largely to polished popular music, he had become fascinated by American blues and rhythm and blues. Muddy Waters, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Howlin' Wolf. The music sounded raw, dangerous, and alive. It did not politely ask for attention. It seized it. Then came the train platform encounter that helped change British music. In 1961,
that I have some sort of view which other young people think
Jagger
the
met
same.
a childhood acquaintance named Keith Richards at Dartford railway station. They had known each other years earlier, but what reconnected them was the collection of blues records Jagger was carrying. Richards recognized the music. A conversation began. Imagine the scene for a moment. Two young men stand on an ordinary railway platform while commuters move around them, each person traveling towards a predictable destination. Offices, schools, shops, homes, neither Jagger nor Richards could have known that their conversation would lead to sold-out stadiums, scandalous headlines, broken friendships, historic albums, and one of the longest partnerships in popular music. At that moment, they were simply two boys talking about records most people around them had never heard. But sometimes a life changes without announcing that it is changing. Sometimes destiny looks like a train you nearly miss. Jagger began performing with musicians who would eventually become the Rolling Stones. At first, the band offered none of the security his education promised. There was no guarantee of money, no guarantee of fame, no guarantee they would survive for a year. Jagger attempted to balance university with music, but the two paths were pulling him in opposite directions. One represented the future others had carefully imagined for him. The other was uncertain, socially suspicious, and almost impossible to explain. Eventually, he left the London School of Economics and committed himself to the band. Today, that decision sounds obvious because we know what followed. At the time, it was not obvious at all. It looked like a gifted student abandoning a reliable future for a group of young musicians playing American blues in crowded clubs. To his parents, it must have felt less like the beginning of history and more like a serious mistake. But Jagger possessed something that would later become central to the Rolling Stones' survival. He could recognize value before the rest of the world understood it. The band did not try to appear safe. They leaned into danger. Where the Beatles were often presented as charming and approachable, the Rolling Stones were marketed as the group parents should fear. Their music was rougher. Their appearance was less controlled. Their attitude seemed confrontational. And standing at the center was Jagger. His voice did not sound polished in the traditional sense. His movements did not resemble the controlled performances expected from respectable British entertainers. He twisted, strutted, pointed, jumped, and stared directly into the camera as though challenging the audience to look away. Many could not decide whether they loved him or hated him. That uncertainty made him impossible to ignore. By the mid-1960s, the Rolling Stones had become international stars. Songs such as The Last Time, Get Off of My Cloud, and Paint It Black helped turn the group into a global force. Then came Satisfaction, built around one of the most recognizable guitar riffs ever recorded and delivered through Jagger's voice with frustration, desire, and rebellion. The student who had once attended economics lectures was suddenly helping define a generation. But fame did not bring safety. It brought surveillance. The Rolling Stones' rebellious image attracted intense attention from newspapers, police, and the British establishment. The group was not viewed only as entertainment. To many authority figures, it represented a cultural threat. In 1967, Jagger and Richards were arrested following a highly publicized police raid. Jagger was charged over possession of stimulant tablets that had been legally purchased abroad, while Richards faced a separate charge connected to allowing cannabis to be smoked on his property. The case became a national spectacle. Newspapers treated the musicians less like defendants and more like symbols of everything respectable society feared about youth culture. Jagger received a prison sentence. For a moment, this was no longer a story about controversial music. One of Britain's biggest stars was behind bars, and the career of the Rolling Stones appeared vulnerable to destruction by the very establishment their image had provoked. Then, something unexpected happened. Parts of the British press began questioning whether the punishment had become excessive. The most famous intervention came through a newspaper editorial arguing that Jagger's celebrity had caused him to be treated more harshly, not more leniently. His conviction
after you
was
read
overturned on appeal.
certain poetry,
He walked
then
free.
you get interested in it.
Yet the experience revealed the true stakes surrounding the band. Their rebellion was not just a costume worn for publicity photographs. It had consequences. Jagger had discovered that fame could fill stadiums while also placing a target on his back. And the irony would grow with time. The same Briton that once imprisoned him would eventually call him Sir Mick Jagger. But before the knighthood, before the honors and institutional respect, the Rolling Stones had to survive themselves. Success changed the scale of everything. More money, more pressure, more travel, more temptation. The death of founding member Brian Jones in 1969 cast a shadow over the band as it entered a new decade. Jones had been increasingly separated from the group before his death, but his loss became part of the darker mythology surrounding the Stones. The music continued. The machine grew. Albums such as Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Saint strengthened the band's reputation, but behind the performances, the internal relationships were becoming increasingly complicated. At the center of the tension was the partnership between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. Together, they could write songs that defined eras. Together, they could also make one another furious. Richards descended deeper into drug dependency during the 1970s. His legal problems and unpredictable behavior created serious risks for the band. Jagger increasingly assumed responsibility for the practical side of keeping the Rolling Stones alive. This produced one of the great contradictions in his public image. On stage, Jagger appeared reckless. Off-stage, he was often the organizer. The provocateur was also the businessman. The wild performer understood contracts, schedules, presentation, and long-term survival. The education he had abandoned had not disappeared completely, it had simply been redirected. He had left economics, but economics had never entirely left him. Behind the lips, hips, and headlines was a man helping manage an international enterprise. To illustrate what that pressure might have felt like, imagine a fictional employee named Daniel working backstage during a chaotic Rolling Stones tour in the 1970s. Daniel watches crew members searching for missing equipment. A promoter demands answers. Rumors spread that one of the musicians may not be ready for the show. Thousands of fans are already entering the venue. Then Jagger walks through the confusion. To the audience, he is the symbol of disorder. Backstage, he asks about timing, security, and the running order. He checks what must be fixed. He wants to know whether the show will begin as promised. Daniel suddenly realizes that the man advertised as rock and roll's ultimate rebel may also be the person trying hardest to stop the whole operation from collapsing. Daniel is fictional, but the contradiction is real. Mick Jagger did not survive only because he could move across a stage. He survived because he understood the stage was part of a business that needed constant control. That control, however,
Can I use the phone, s'il vous plaît?
Richards sometimes viewed Jagger's discipline and ambition as betrayal. Jagger saw Richards' instability as a threat to everything they had built. Their friendship became a mixture of loyalty, competition, resentment, and dependence. They knew one another too well to remain comfortable. Yet they needed one another too much to walk away easily. By the 1980s, the conflict became impossible to hide. Jagger pursued solo projects, releasing music outside the Rolling Stones. From his perspective, it was an opportunity to explore another identity. To Richards, it appeared to threaten the band's existence. The relationship deteriorated. Public comments became sharper. Communication became difficult. The two men who had once bonded over blues records at a railway station now seemed unable to agree on whether their shared creation still had a future. This was not a temporary disagreement over one album. It was an identity crisis. Could Mick Jagger exist without the Rolling Stones? Could the Rolling Stones exist without Mick Jagger? And after decades of resentment, could Jagger and Richards still stand together convincingly enough for audiences to believe the chemistry? For a period, the answer appeared to be no. The band's future was surrounded by speculation. Fans feared the Rolling Stones had finally reached the breakup that critics had predicted for years. Yet something deeper than friendship kept pulling Jagger and Richards back together. Perhaps it was business. Perhaps it was history. Perhaps it was the knowledge that neither man could recreate with anyone else what happened when they occupied the same musical space. They eventually repaired the partnership enough to continue. Not perfectly. Not sentimentally. The conflict never disappeared completely. Instead, it became part of the structure. They learned that survival did not always require harmony. Sometimes it required accepting that the friction itself was inseparable from the chemistry. The Rolling Stones returned to massive tours, transforming themselves from the dangerous young outsiders of the 1960s into one of the most powerful live attractions in the world. This created another challenge. How does a rebellion grow old without becoming a museum exhibit? Jagger's answer was physical. He performed as though age were an accusation he intended to disprove. Night after night, he crossed enormous stages built for tens of thousands of spectators. His movement became more than entertainment. It became evidence. Audiences did not attend only to hear the songs. They came to witness whether he could still do it. And every successful performance increased the pressure on the next one. Jagger's discipline became increasingly important. His stage stamina was not magic. It was supported by preparation, exercise, rehearsal, and control. The son of a physical education teacher had become one of the most physically enduring performers in rock history. The family influence he had appeared to reject had followed him onto the stage. Then came the transformation no one in the 1960s could have imagined. In 2003, Mick Jagger was knighted for services to music. Sir Mick Jagger. The title carried an almost absurd historical symmetry. The young performer, once presented as a corrupting influence on British youth, was now formally honored by the establishment. The man who had served time in prison after a controversial prosecution was welcomed into a national tradition of recognition. Some saw the honor as proof that rebellion had finally been absorbed by the system. Others saw it as Jagger's ultimate victory over it. He had not become respectable by disappearing. Respectability had moved towards him. But the most dramatic test was still ahead. In 2019, the Rolling Stones announced that their North American tour would be postponed because Jagger required medical treatment. The details soon became clear. He needed heart valve replacement surgery. For any 75-year-old patient, the procedure was serious. For Jagger, it threatened the defining instrument of his career, not his voice, but his body. A guitarist may perform while seated, a singer may reduce movement. But Mick Jagger's stage identity had been built around motion. Remove the sprinting, the dancing, and the relentless energy, and audiences would still hear the songs. Yet they might no longer feel they were watching the same man. The surgery was successful. Then came recovery. Picture him alone during an early morning after the operation. The room is still. There is no band, no applause, no Keith Richards guitar riff arriving from behind him, no stadium waiting for the first note. For perhaps the first time in decades, the challenge cannot be defeated through charisma. The body must heal at its own pace. Maybe he looks down at the scar and understands that this opponent is different. A newspaper can be challenged. A court decision can be appealed. A damaged friendship can be repaired enough to continue. But the heart does not respond to image. It does not care how many records were sold. It does not care how loudly a crowd chants your name. For a performer who had spent his life controlling the room, recovery required surrendering control to time, medicine, and repetition. One careful movement. Then another. Walking, stretching, rebuilding stamina. Testing what the body could tolerate. The imagined details of that private moment may be fictionalized, but the outcome is documented. Only weeks after the procedure, Jagger was moving through dance rehearsals again. The postponed tour resumed soon afterwards. When he returned to the stage, the performance meant something different. He was no longer merely revisiting old songs, he was demonstrating survival in real time. Every run across the stage carried the memory of the hospital room. Every dance step answered the question people had been afraid to ask. Was Mick Jagger finished? Not yet. But endurance has never meant invulnerability. In 2021, another devastating loss struck the Rolling Stones when drummer Charlie Watts died. Watts had been the calm center of the band's sound for decades. While Jagger commanded attention and Richards projected danger, Watts offered restraint, precision, and stability. His death created a kind of absence that could not be solved through exercise or negotiation. The Rolling Stones continued, but continuing did not mean nothing had changed. That is another truth hidden inside Jagger's longevity. Survival is not the same as remaining untouched. To last for 60 years is to collect losses. Friends disappear, bandmates die, relationships change, audiences age alongside you. Songs written by young men begin carrying the weight of funerals, reconciliations, and time. Jagger's greatest achievement may not be that he remained young. It may be that he learned how to keep moving while fully aware that youth was gone. The image of eternal rebellion was always impossible. What remained was discipline, adaptability, and a refusal to let nostalgia become paralysis. The Rolling Stones continued recording, and their later work proved that the group was not prepared to exist only as a touring monument to its past. For Jagger, creation remained part of survival. This brings us back to that empty stadium. Imagine the fictional stagehand Daniel again, now decades older. In the 1970s, he watched Jagger walk through backstage chaos before a concert. In 2019, he stands inside another venue while the tour remains uncertain. The stage is ready, but the singer is recovering. Daniel looks at the tape marking Jagger's position and wonders whether anyone will stand there again. Weeks later, the crew receives confirmation. The tour is returning. On opening night, the stadium fills. Lights sweep across the audience. Richards takes his place. The first guitar notes explode through the speakers. Then Jagger appears. Daniel watches from the side of the stage as the 75-year-old man moves towards the crowd. The audience sees a rock star. Daniel sees the same contradiction he noticed decades earlier. The supposed symbol of chaos has survived through extraordinary control. The man famous for refusing limits has spent his life preparing himself to challenge them. And perhaps that is the secret people miss when they describe Mick Jagger as ageless. He is not ageless. His story is powerful precisely because age is present. The years are real. The surgery was real. The conflicts were real. The losses were real. The achievement is not that time failed to touch him. The achievement is that time touched everything, and still he walked back onto the stage. Mick Jagger's life story contains glamour, scandal, wealth, and global fame. But beneath all of it runs one consistent theme: endurance. The student endured the disappointment of abandoning a respectable education. The young star endured prosecution and public hostility. The band leader endured decades of tension with the musical partner he could neither fully escape nor replace. The performer endured age, grief, and major heart surgery. And the Rolling Stones endured predictions of their ending almost from the moment they began. That does not make Jagger immortal. It makes him human in a way the mythology sometimes hides. He has simply built his identity around answering endings with another performance. So the next time you watch Mick Jagger race across a stage, do not see only the famous dance moves. See the boy holding blues records at Dartford station. See the economics student choosing uncertainty. See the prisoner whose punishment shocked parts of the country. See the band leader trying to control a machine constantly threatening to break apart. See the friend standing beside Keith Richards after decades of arguments neither man truly forgot. See the patient rebuilding his strength one movement at a time. And see the empty strip of tape on the stadium floor waiting to discover whether he will return. For more than 60 years, the world has repeatedly asked the same question: how much longer can Mick Jagger possibly continue? Perhaps that has always been the wrong question. The better question is this: how many times can one person be told that the music is over before he stops believing there is still another song? Mick Jagger has already given his answer. He gave it when he left university. He gave it when he walked out of prison. He gave it when the Rolling Stones survived the 1980s. He gave it when he returned after heart surgery. And every time the lights rise and he steps towards the microphone, he gives it again. Not yet. If Mick Jagger's journey surprised you, tell us which chapter stayed with you most. The railway meeting that created a legendary partnership, the legal battle that nearly destroyed his future, the conflict with Keith Richards, or the extraordinary return after heart surgery. And subscribe, because the next story proves that behind every music legend is a moment when the entire world believed the final curtain had already fallen.